Welcome. This is David Boles, Human Meme. Today's topic, Master's Thesis Interview. My wife, Janna Sweenie, and I were recently asked by a graduate student working on a master's thesis about deaf culture and interpreting for Broadway and regional theater to answer some questions about that process and to get our perspectives on the matter, and we obliged. Janna is deaf. I am hearing. We teach American Sign Language together and apart, and we write books about deafness and disability and culture and learning American Sign Language. Here is the content of that interview, conducted via email in written communication. Questions for David. Number 1. I read your review on Spring Awakening and saw that some parts were problematic for you. The amplification of the hearing actors' voices, but not the deaf actor voices, for example. Do you think it's possible for both types of actors to be completely equal on stage, or is having a 100% deaf cast the best solution to ensure that hearing actors don't overshadow deaf actors? My reply: it is impossible for both deaf and hearing actors to appear equally on the same stage aesthetically for a hearing or mixed audience, because there is a difference in perception and communication. Perception in how the world is viewed and felt and related to, and communication in that ASL has its own internal memes and structures and intrinsic ways of knowing that are innate to natural language signers. And it is nigh impossible for a non-native signer to have the same applicable skill of combining culture, stressors, semiotics, and synergism in a cohesive whole. There is finite doneness to the professional deaf actor experience that cannot be equally shared or radicalized by a hearing actor on the same stage. A show for the deaf should be done by the deaf, unless there are not enough deaf actors who are interested in participating in the show, but that would never be a problem in a Broadway caliber production. Question number 2 for David. Do you think deaf accessibility to Broadway regional shows has improved over the past few years? My answer: if anything, accessibility has fallen away on the regional and professional stage, much the same way the Americans with Disabilities Act is quickly diminishing into dying. And I refer to my Disability and Indifference Human Meme podcast with a link. Evidence of this slow death is in the virtual elimination of shadow interpreting on the Broadway stage. Shadow interpreting is where the interpreter is actually on the stage and assigned to a particular actor and is doing the interpreting right there in the scene. The lack of deaf interpreters for shows and the terrible death of the TDF Juilliard interpreter training program for Broadway musicals are all examples of impending fallowness. Today, the function of the live interpretation is being replaced by text captioning of spoken words on stage. Stale, uninteresting, non-cultural. And a real backward kick in the face to the deaf community. But streaming text on a screen is an undeniable money saver for the producers. A machine is always cheaper and more deathly than a live human being with demands and prescience and aesthetic integrity that must be practiced and made functionally foundational. Question number 3 for David. From your knowledge, are there currently more hearing or deaf interpreters interpreting Broadway shows? If there are more hearing interpreters, why aren't there more deaf ones? If there are more deaf interpreters, why is that so? My reply: there are always more hearing interpreters than deaf interpreters, because the hearing are easier to hire and get up to speed. Hearing interpreters can show up and interpret on the fly, while the deaf interpreter must first read the script, get the lyrics, listen to the music, and memorize the parts assigned to them, because they cannot rely on hearing the live dialogue to help them know the role or interpret what is being said. On-the-fly interpreting, even if the hearing interpreters are excellent, is always ineffective, because they are not practiced, they do not know the script, and they are always, inevitably, behind the action happening live on stage. That means the deaf interpreter is always more prepared and profound in the execution of the performance. But it takes a magnitude more establishment of time and dedication for everyone involved in the process to actually involve the deaf in a proper interpretation. Question number 1 for Janna. What did your role as TDF Broadway musical advisor for the Juilliard School Interpreter Program entail? Janna answers: I would work with excellent interpreters from all around the USA who would come to Juilliard in New York for a week to learn how to try to blend the spoken word with a visual ASL performance. We would mainly focus on translation of text into images, something larger and grander than just conversational signed ASL, but something that could be seen and related to visually in the back row of the theater. We, the deaf, would then give feedback to the hearing interpreters as they practiced for their live performances. Question number 2 for Janna. You've worked as a vocational rehabilitation counselor for the past 15 years and have taught ASL for 40 years. You're clearly passionate about helping the deaf become successful members of society. Do you think there is enough support and consideration for the deaf community in the world of arts? Is awareness improving? Janna answers: we always hope as a society that we are moving forward and never backward. Then there is the reality that hits the wishing. I spend most of my time as a vocational rehabilitation counselor working with businesses to convince them that the deaf worker is just as valuable as the hearing worker, and that giving any disabled worker a chance is the right thing for the job and for society as a whole. As for the arts, I am slightly dismayed that sloppy interpreting is becoming more acceptable to save on money. Instead of hiring a certified interpreter, many theatrical producers will accept good enough when it comes to interpreting a performance, while they would never accept that standard when it comes to the overall production values of their show. Interpreting a show is a production value and should be treated as something more important than just spectacle and an afterthought. Question number 3 for Janna. What challenges in society have you faced as a deaf person, either growing up or as an adult? Janna responds: impatience is probably the most frustrating thing I have to deal with every day. People tend to lump all people with a disability into their direct experience. If this deaf person does that and thinks that, then so do all deaf people. Well, that is wrong thinking, but hard to overcome. We are all our own person, with different needs and abilities, but finding people who are patient enough to take each of us on our own standards and talents is challenging. If you want to know one thing, always remember this. Do what's best for the disabled person, not what is easiest for you. Final question for David and Janna. What do you think brought you guys together? Was it the arts or something else? What does your relationship say about the potential for other hearing, non-hearing people to unite? Our reply. Read pages 279 through 281 of our Hand Jive book to learn about how we met. And you can find that book for free, read it all, at bolesbooks.com. Click on American Sign Language and it's right there. And I include the link. We have been married for almost 30 years, and the key to our success is working together on projects we care about, putting into the world for discussion. We write books together at bolesbooks.com. We teach online together at hardcoreasl.com. And we teach in person at the City University of New York and other schools on the East Coast. We also have our separate interests that keep us sane, but we know we are special together, and we know that we love working together to bring more understanding to conflicting cultures. And that is why we are here and together, because inclusion matters more than giving up and going our separate ways. Oftentimes, marriages between the hearing and the deaf do not last long, but that's also rudimentarily true of other deaf marriages and hearing marriages and so on. Because opposing cultural demands can be too pressing and dividing, and too often, one culture must win over the other culture for the marriage to succeed. We have been able to fine-tune a balance in both worlds to our ultimate benefit and longevity. Thank you for listening. Be a human meme.